Hey guys, so the video cut off, but I'm just gonna pick up right where we left off. So hopefully you are seeing this. I'm putting both links on the page. If you accidentally clicked on this one first, go back. There is another video that is me reading the first part of chapter 4. This is the rest of it, and then chapter 5. Ooh. There we go. So we're at the top of page 114. They stood, began clapping in rhythm to their chant. Sandy, Sandy, Sandy. Nap and Lord picked up the beat and started an undertone of arf, 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 and soon the audience became a two-part chorus with half the auditorium chanting Sandy, and the other half responding with arf, arf, in a manner more suited to an athletic contest than musical theater. The curtain was dropped, the house lights came on, and the chanting softened, faded, and died. Nap and Lord exchanged a satisfied look. Mrs. Reynolds walked on stage and stood in front of the curtain. She held a microphone in her hand and hissed into it, "Sit down." Thump, 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 thump. The sound of hundreds of bottoms hitting hundreds of seats followed. Mrs. Reynolds waited until an embarrassed silence fell over the auditorium. Part of the theater experience is learning to be a good audience. You have not been a good audience. You have been a very bad one. I am sorry that you have not learned at home how to act in public. I am ashamed for you because I know you are not ashamed for yourselves. I would like you to leave. Now, you can start correcting your behavior by leaving this auditorium in a quiet and orderly fashion. Suddenly, senior monitors appeared at the end of every third row, and we quietly and slowly made our way toward the exit. The auditorium was almost empty by the time we reached the exit. Mrs. Olinski was sitting in her chair between the doors. She called my name. Julian Singh, she called. I would like to see you a minute. Had she seen me slip backstage? Or did she think that I started that ruckus in the auditorium? My school days are over, I thought. I will be expelled, I thought. How will I break the news to Papa? Mrs. Olinski said, I understand you have guests at Sillington House. Yes, ma'am, we do. Mr. and Mrs. Diamondstein were due to arrive from Florida this afternoon. Mrs. Diamondstein is an old friend of mine. She asked me to stop by and meet her new husband. How would you like to ride home with me? She asked. I was so relieved that I could not speak. I answered by nodding my head, like one of those nodding animals that Americans put on the rear ledge of their automobiles. Ethan, who was just behind me, said, May I come too? Mrs. Diamondstein is my Grandma Draper. Yes, so she is. I had almost forgotten. Of course, you may come. Let me go backstage and get Nadia, Ethan suggested. Mr. Diamondstein is her grandfather. Mrs. Olinski laughed. It seems all of our 6th grade is one happy family. Go ahead, she said. Go backstage and tell Nadia to meet us at my van. A voice that was midway out the door called, Can I come too? You, Noah. What reason do you have? Mrs. Olinski asked. Me? Noah asked. You want to know what reason I have for coming along? Mrs. Olinski smiled patiently. Well, Mrs. Olinski, my reason is the best of all. Fact, I was best man at their wedding. Mrs. Olinski laughed. Were you really? Yes, I was. I'll tell you about it. I'll spare no detail. Mrs. Olinski laughed. Then, by all means, Noah, you must come along. Noah grinned. I've always wanted to ride in a handicapped van. All my life, I've wanted to see how a disabled person like yourself applies the brakes and steps on the gas. Mrs. Olinski said, I don't exactly step on the gas. There you go, Noah said. This is precisely what I would like to see. I would precisely like to see exactly how you apply the gas. Mrs. Olinski said, That is either the most honest or the most dishonest answer I've ever heard. I must notify the bus driver that I'll be driving you 4 souls home. Why did she say that? She was smiling. Did she know that we were the souls? Did she know? Noah caught my eye and quickly changed the subject. You'll have to take Ginger home too, Mrs. Olinski, if you don't mind, of course. You don't have to have any special fittings in the van to transport animals. It's a good thing, too. Now, if Ginger were a seeing eye dog... Mrs. Olinski interrupted. Noah, she said, run down to the bus and tell Mrs. Korshak that I will be along in a minute. I have a message for her. I'd be happy to give her that message, Mrs. Olinski. I'm sure you would. But the message involves permissions that I, not you, have the authority to give. Noah started down the row of yellow buses, and Mrs. Olinski followed. There had been a moment backstage when I had been tempted to allow Arnold to eat the drug treats. That had been the same moment... Oh, wait. Did I skip one? Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I should have... Sorry, stop there. How does Hamilton start trouble while watching the play? So how does Hamilton start trouble while watching the play? All right, now on to the next part. There had been a moment backstage when I had been tempted to allow Arnold to eat the drug treats. That had been the same moment that I thought it would be satisfying to get even with Frolic and Nap. But then I was able mentally to separate Frolic from Nap and Arnold from both of them. So I slipped over to the props table, scooped up all the poisoned treats, and put them in my right pocket. At the same time, I substituted Ginger's wholesome treats I had taken from Nadia's shopping bag, from my left pocket. The drugged treats were still in my pocket. Ethan, Nadia, and Ginger had not yet come out of the auditorium. Noah and Mrs. Olinski had gone to speak to Mrs. Korshak. I stood alone. There was something I wanted to do. When Nap had started that ruckus, I had momentarily regretted my decision to save Arnold. I was still so angry that I was about to violate one of the cardinal rules that Gopal had taught me. I walked out onto the street so that no one on the sidewalk would notice as I made my way down the line of buses waiting, headlight to taillight, for pickup, by the curb. Beyond them was the line of cars waiting for pickups. Traffic could go only one way, and no one was allowed to make a U-turn, so even those cars that had already picked up their riders were stuck, waiting for the buses to load. Gopal had taught me that magicians never reveal the secrets of their trade to laymen. Gopal always said that magicians who were interested in letting people know how clever they were not really magicians. Don't ever destroy the wonder, Gopal had said. Let your magic show you off, not you show off your magic. I knew that Hamilton Nap would find out soon enough that Arnold, not Ginger, had been chosen for the afternoon's performance. He would find out soon enough that his trick had not worked. I knew that I should never reveal to Hamilton Nap that I had saved Arnold from the fate he had meant for Ginger. I knew all of that. Yet, I moved toward the vet in a van. Dr. Knapp was behind the wheel, waiting for her turn to pull out. I walked around the back of the van onto the sidewalk on the passenger's side. I tapped on the window and motioned for Ham to roll it down. I reached into the open window. He pulled away from me, but said nothing. "What's the matter?" his mother asked. Wrong person. "What's the matter?" his mother asked. "Your son has something growing out of his head," I said, as I pulled 2 bacon-shaped doggy treats from his ears. "I think these belong to you," I said, as one by one I dropped the rest of the drugged biscuits onto his lap. I turned and walked away. I was glad that I had chops. Gopal would forgive me. Alright, question before we start chapter 5, and this is more of a reflection one, some stuff from the text but also think on your own. Why do you think Julian saves Arnold? Why do you think Julian saves Arnold? Why does he make that call when he would have had the chance to one-up Hamilton and get Ginger in the play? Once again, if you need more time, and you probably do, pause the video, answer the question, then keep listening. It'll be a lot easier than having to go back through after. But if you do need them, the questions will be in the description below this video. Chapter 5. Oh, wait. Yep. The deadline for choosing an academic team was the Tuesday following the winter holiday. The other homeroom teachers were ready by Thanksgiving. They had held mini contests in their classrooms and had selected the winners of those. They had ready answers for anyone who asked how they had chosen their teams. In the teacher's lounge, lounge, Mrs. Sharkey, who taught 6th grade math, accused Mrs. Olinski of being dictatorial, and Miss Massolino, who taught music and who did not have a homeroom at all, hinted that she was lazy. Mrs. Olinski did not take kindly to these remarks. Her voice quavering, she answered her critics. "I have my reasons," she said, even though she knew she didn't. Something stronger than reason was having its way with her, and she didn't know what that was either. Mrs. Lorenzen, Epiphany Middle School principal, called Mrs. Olinski into the office one afternoon and quietly warned her that she better have a good answer for the parents of any high honor roll student who didn't make her team. Mrs. Olinski said, "By the time they get to 6th grade, honor roll students won't risk making a mistake, and sometimes, to be successful, you have to risk making mistakes." Mrs. Lorenzen agreed with her, but warned her that that would not be a very popular reason. "Furthermore," Mrs. Olinski added, "sometimes we even have to risk making fools of ourselves." Mrs. Lorenzen never approved of that answer either. Even though Mrs. Olinski could not tell why, she could tell when she decided not to hold tryouts. It was on a Saturday in late October, sometime after 4 o'clock. She had been correcting social studies papers and had just finished reading Noah Gersham's essay on the First Amendment when the thought flew into her head. She would appoint her team the way the president appointed his cabinet. She made her decision, just like that. She chose Noah right away, and almost immediately after, she thought of Nadia and Ethan. They looked like strong candidates. She would watch them and see. In the weeks that followed, she became more convinced of their being right for the job. She had not yet officially notified any of them because she wanted to make all 4 appointments at the same time, and the 4th was causing problems. All right, next question. Who was the first person Mrs. Olinski chose for the Academic Bowl team? Who was the first person Mrs. Olinski chose for the Academic Bowl team? She had been considering asking Hamilton Knapp. Yes, that Hamilton Knapp. Although he was naughty, he was also smart, and bad boys had always held a certain charm for her. But each time something told her he was the right choice, something else told her he was wrong. So she held back. While she waffled between asking Ham and not asking him, she never gave a thought to asking Julian Singh. He was smart, or else his English accent made him seem so. And he was sophisticated, or else his English accent made him seem so. But Julian Singh was too far off the mainland. He was an island unto himself, definitely not a team player. Ham Knapp was a leader. Ham Knapp had friends, but Julian stood alone, just as he had stood alone the first day of school at the blackboard in front of the word cripple. On the day that Epiphany Middle School was invited to attend Annie, Mrs. Olinski had driven her van to the high school and had arrived ahead of the school bus. She waited at the foot of the steps as the kids filed out. She saw Julian Singh push his way forward and then scurry down the steps and out of sight. He had disappeared into thin air. She didn't want to call into thin air and look to all the world, and all the other teachers, as if she had no control of her class. Mrs. Olinski was annoyed with Julian Singh. Once inside the auditorium, she had looked for him again, but had been unable to spot him before the house lights dimmed, and the show got underway. Then Sandy appeared on stage, and the clapping and the chanting, "Arf, arf, arf," had started in the section of the auditorium where her class was seated. From where she had been sitting, in a handicapped space by the exit, she could not see who had started it, but she knew one of her students was responsible. She knew it, and she was angry. Mrs. Olinski had a great tolerance for mischief, but she had no patience for malice. This was not mischief. There is a playful quality to mischief. This was malice. There is a mean quality to malice. Someone in her class was terribly mean. When the lights went on and Mrs. Reynolds stormed on stage to scold the audience, Mrs. Olinski was able to wheel herself around to examine her students. With a sick feeling in her stomach, she scanned them one at a time. Like the cursor on a computer screen, her eyes moved from the first row to the second, and stopped. Her pulse quickened. She knew. She had no proof, never would have proof, but she knew. She knew who had started the ruckus. And she knew then that she would not, could not, ask Hamilton Knapp to be the fourth member of the team. And that is when she went to tea at Sillington House. All right, next question. Who did Mrs. Olinski consider for the team, but was concerned because of behavior? What were her reasons for considering him despite his bad behavior? Oh, wait, I meant to ask that one a page before. Okay, I have two for right here. So that's the first one. Who did Mrs. Olinski consider for the team, but was concerned because of behavior? What were her reasons for considering him despite his bad behavior? And then, second question here, why did she finally decide not to ask the student mentioned in that question? Why did she finally decide not to ask the student mentioned in that question? Margaret Draper Diamondstein must have been waiting at the window. No sooner had Mrs. Olinski stopped her van than her old friend came rushing out the door. She was wearing a jogging suit but no coat. The wind was whipping off the lake, and she hugged her upper arms and stamped her feet as she waited for the door to open. Margie Diamondstein reached up into the van, and Eva Marie Olinski reached down out of it, and they hugged. Then a voice said, "Hi, Grandma." It was Ethan. Margaret said, "Ethan, is that you?" "Yeah, me, Ethan." "Come on down out of that van and let me see you," she said. Ethan stood in front of her, looking enchantingly awkward until Margaret pulled him to her. Eva Marie Olinski saw his arms hanging limply at his side, his wrists hanging below his cuffs like meter sticks, showing how much he had grown since the jacket was new. Ethan slowly lifted his arms and fit them around his grandmother's waist as she rested her chin on the top of his head. She closed her eyes and absorbed the blonde, waxy smell of his hair before she stood him at arm's length. "You've grown since summer," she said. "I have, I know," he answered, and shot his arms out of his sleeves, showing several inches bare above the wrist bones. "Would you believe, only a month ago, these covered my fingertips?" Margaret laughed and said, "No, Ethan, I would not believe." "Just testing." Nadia waited until they had backed away from each other before saying, "Hello, Margaret." "Nadia," Margaret said. "What a surprise. Is Eva Marie, Mrs. Olinski, your teacher too?" Nadia replied, "Yes, Margaret, yes, she is." At that moment, a slender man with heavy gray eyebrows came out of Sillington House, holding his knuckles to his hips as he looked over the scene. He saw Nadia and sprinted over, calling, "Nadia! Nadia!" He hugged her close and then kissed the top of her head several times until Ginger wedged her way between them. "I had no idea I'd see you this afternoon." Nadia said, "Ginger is a star, Grandpa. She is excellent." Her grandfather replied, "I have no doubt about that. After all, Ginger is a genius. And we're going to see her tomorrow night. We're all going. We're going with your mother." "I know," Nadia said, looking very pleased. "I know." Eva Marie Olinski watched Margaret Draper Diamondstein hug her grandson. The new Mrs. Diamondstein was dressed in a jogging suit. A turquoise jogging suit. Turquoise. She had always regarded the color turquoise, like shocking pink or chartreuse, as the color equivalent of the word ain't. Quaint when seldom used, but vulgar in great doses. As she watched Margaret hug her grandchild and Izzy hug his, her mental sensors and her customary good manners started shutting down. She could not stand it another minute. She was on the verge of screaming with pain and rage when she felt her wheelchair begin to move. She felt herself being pushed toward the front porch of Sillington House. Eva Marie Olinski was so blinded by jealousy that she had not noticed Mr. Singh come out. From behind her chair, his voice floated down upon her in soft waves. "I have prepared a tea," he said. A tea, she thought. Yes, a tea. It was that time of day. It was 4:00. "The others will join us shortly." Eva Marie Olinski turned around and at eye level saw a long blue apron. Her eyes traveled upward and saw a black beard, a broad white smile, a pair of amber eyes, a white turban. Saved by a genie, she thought. Mr. Singh maneuvered her wheelchair to a table in the back of the dining room. Without asking, he ceremoniously poured tea into a delicate china cup. "Cream? No. Sugar? No. Yes, it is best to drink tea without." And she did. She drank unhurriedly. Before her cup was empty, she felt something lift from her shoulders. Was it jealousy or injury? Was it anger? Was it all of the above? She replaced her emptied cup in its saucer. She waited. She was calm. Margie and Izzy joined her at the table, and she drank another cup of tea and ate a cucumber sandwich, taking 4 bites out of a patch of bread so trim she could have swallowed it whole. She hardly heard what Margaret and Izzy were saying. She did not interrupt, and soon she was listening, first out of politeness, for courtesy was the first of her civilized senses to return, and then out of interest, genuine interest. She looked around the room and saw the 4 children, Ethan, Noah, Nadia, and Julian, sitting at a table on the far side of the room. They were talking among themselves and drinking tea. They did not interrupt one another, Mrs. Olinski thought. How unusual. There were nods and smiles and obvious pleasure in one another's company. Mrs. Olinski thought, how unusual to find 4 6th graders who listened to one another sympathetically, unselfishly. How curious. How courteous. Mrs. Olinski thought, when people come to tea, they are courteous. She thought, I believe in courtesy. It is the way we avoid hurting people's feelings. She thought that maybe, just maybe, Western civilization was in a decline because people did not take time to take tea at 4 o'clock. The souls continued their animated conversation when suddenly, as if on signal, the 4 of them looked back at Mrs. Olinski. And that is when she knew. That is the exact moment she knew that Julian Singh would be the 4th member of her team, and that she would always give good answers when asked why she had chosen them. And then and there, she also knew that someday she would drink another cup of slow tea at Sillington House. All right. So, I have 2 more questions here. Second to last one. Mrs. Olinski watches the souls have tea together and describes them as courteous. Why? Mrs. Olinski watches the souls have tea together and describes them as courteous. Why? If you need to look up the word courteous, go do that, and then you can tell me why she would use that word to describe them as they're having tea together. Last question, and this is your personal opinion because we're not actually told anything about this in the book. Why do you think Mrs. Olinski was feeling feelings of anger and jealousy in this scene? So before Mr. Singh brings her inside for tea, she's outside and she begins feeling anger and jealousy. Why do you think she's feeling that? Not just the situation that she's in, but why do you think those feelings might have come up? So now this is you kind of making inferences based off anything that you know. There is not a right answer because I don't know exactly. I have a suspicion, but I don't know for sure. So I'm curious what you think. That's the last question. Why do you think Mrs. Olinski was feeling anger and jealousy in this scene? All right. Once again, I will put all of the questions in the description of the video below. Please answer me. Complete sentences. Make sure it's clear to me what it is that you are expressing and the question that you're answering for each. And this can be shared in your Google Doc very easily. If you write it out on paper, make sure you take a picture and send it to me. If at any point you missed something or you need to hear a part again, just rewind back in the video or go back to the first video with the earlier part of chapter 4. I hope you guys are enjoying this book as much as I enjoy it. I like these characters more and more every chapter. Bye!